Okay, so you know how it is. You're listening to the Dave and Molly podcast, trying to stay on top of all the crazy stuff happening right now, and it seems like they're hitting on all the big topics lately, and you specifically flagged a few things that have really been on your mind, like all the Elon Musk stuff, his involvement with the government, the Tesla protests, their stock kind of tanking. Then there's the whole government shutdown thing, and Trump openly promoting Tesla. You even mentioned Bernie Sanders' take on it all, and of course that whole gesture. It's a lot to unpack.
It really is. And it's all kind of tangled up together, too. So for this deep dive, we wanted to really zero in on the stuff you found interesting from the Dave and Molly podcast. We pulled together a bunch of different sources, YouTube video transcripts, reports, articles, political commentary, all trying to make sense of this whole situation. We're talking about Tesla boycotts, government efficiency initiatives with Musk right in the middle, improper payments, and a whole lot of political opinions swirling around. Basically, we want to do the heavy lifting for you, go through all this info, pull out the important bits, and connect the dots so you can walk away with a clear picture without having to spend hours digging through it all yourself.
All right, so let's start with this Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. Elon Musk leading the charge. What exactly is this all about?
Right. So from what we've gathered, this department was set up with a very specific goal in mind, auditing government agencies and making some serious cuts to spending. And Musk himself, yeah, he's apparently the one calling the shots as the chief executive.
And it sounds like those cuts have been pretty far-reaching. We're seeing reports of the Department of Education being completely defunded and then mass firings across all sorts of federal agencies, park rangers, baby formula testers, USAID workers, even IRS staff. It seems pretty widespread.
Yeah, it's definitely been making waves. One of the congressional hearing transcripts we looked at even mentioned that while there's all this talk about the numbers, the specific roles being cut, and the overall impact on these agencies, well, it's still pretty mucky. But this whole idea of shrinking the government and cutting costs, that's at the heart of DOGE's mission.
I've even heard some people using the word coup in relation to all of this. That's a pretty loaded term. What are they basing that on?
Well, some of the protesters we saw in the videos we reviewed, they're the ones using that kind of language. Their argument seems to be that by systematically defunding these agencies, getting rid of so many government workers, and potentially putting people loyal to a specific ideology in those positions, it all points to a power grab. But on the other hand, there's also this argument that Trump actually campaigned on this very idea, bringing in someone like Musk to shake things up and make the government more efficient. So some folks see this as him simply following through on a campaign promise.
So basically, different interpretations depending on where you stand politically. All right, let's shift gears to Tesla. There's definitely a lot of pushback happening, protest calls for boycotts. What's fueling all of that?
Well, these anti-Elon and anti-Tesla protests are popping up all over the country. New York, Glendale, Palo Alto, just like you mentioned, hearing about on the Dave and Molly podcast. And the reasons people are protesting, they vary, but there are some common threads. A lot of it revolves around Musk's increasingly public political views, his behavior, and the things he's been saying, which have even led some to question his mental state. And of course, there's his very direct involvement with the government through DOGE.
I even saw this crazy video going around of a Tesla being set on fire. The caption said something like, "Tesla burns to a crisp." It seems like a pretty extreme way to get your point across.
It's definitely a powerful image, and it really speaks to the level of anger and frustration out there. But beyond these kind of dramatic acts, we've also seen reports of more organized protests happening right outside Tesla showrooms. There was one in Burbank, for example, that apparently started with just a couple of people and then grew to something like 100 participants in just a few weeks. It seems like there's a real groundswell of opposition building.
And what about these calls to boycott Tesla? What's the main motivation behind that?
Well, it seems like the boycott is directly linked to Musk.
Speaking of sales, Tesla's stock has definitely taken a hit. How bad is it really?
It's not pretty. One report called it the steepest drop in Tesla's stock price in 5 years. And this whole downward trend started right around the time Musk started getting more involved with the government and politics. It's led a lot of investors and analysts to wonder if maybe he's not as focused on Tesla as he used to be.
And the numbers are mind-blowing. Reports of over $700 to $800 billion in market value wiped out since he dove headfirst into the government scene.
Yeah, that's right. And they're also talking about Tesla experiencing its longest losing streak since their IPO. To really understand how massive that market cap loss is, it's reportedly bigger than the entire market value of a bunch of other major car companies combined. It's hard to ignore a hit that big.
It makes you wonder, is all of Musk's political stuff actually turning off a big chunk of the people who buy electric cars?
Hmm.
I mean, we know that the states with the most EV adoption, they tend to lean more liberal politically.
That's a theory that's gaining a lot of traction. If a significant portion of potential EV buyers in those states are being put off by Musk's political views, that could definitely have a real impact on Tesla's bottom line. And we're seeing some other red flags, too. Reports of more and more people falling behind on their car payments and Tesla offering things like zero down and subprime loans. Some people see that as a sign that they're struggling to sell cars.
And this isn't just a U.S. thing either, is it? I remember hearing something about Tesla sales dropping in Europe and facing more competition in China, maybe even on the Dave and Molly podcast.
That's right. There are reports of a pretty substantial decline in Tesla sales across Europe, places like Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, France, Italy, Spain, Portugal. And while Musk's politics might not be the main concern for Chinese consumers, Tesla's got another problem there: competition. Chinese EV makers like BYD are coming on strong with competitive cars and even offering advanced self-driving features for free. That's putting a lot of pressure on Tesla's market share in a really key market.
All right, so let's talk about Trump. He's been pretty vocal in his support of Tesla lately.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about Trump openly promoting Tesla at the White House. One source even went so far as to call a recent 30-minute event there an ad and conflict of interest. Basically, Trump spent that time pitching Tesla cars to reporters and even hinted that he might buy one himself.
And I remember something about notes he had during that event.
Yeah, someone managed to snap a photo of Trump's notes, and it looked like a price list for Tesla vehicles. It definitely added fuel to the fire, making it seem like the whole event was a big sales pitch for Musk's company, especially considering that Musk has reportedly donated a significant amount of money to Trump's campaigns.
Which raises questions about potential conflicts of interest, especially because Musk had previously said he'd recuse himself from situations like this.
Exactly. He said if a conflict of interest ever came up, he'd step back and that he'd never ask Trump for any favors. But this whole White House event, actively promoting his company while being a major financial backer of Trump, well, it seems to contradict those earlier statements. Some sources even pointed out the irony of Republicans traditionally being all about free markets and against government favoritism, but now they seem to be okay with this very public display of support for a politically aligned company.
Let's talk about this potential government shutdown. How does that tie in with Musk's DOGE and what they're trying to do?
Well, if the government shuts down, agencies have to decide which employees are essential and which ones aren't. And that process of figuring out who to furlough, it lines up perfectly with DOGE's goal of making massive cuts to the federal workforce. Plus, a long shutdown could even force some of those non-essential employees to quit because they can't afford to go without a paycheck.
So basically, a government shutdown would be a pretty efficient, albeit messy, way for DOGE to achieve its goal of shrinking the government.
That's one way to look at it. And there are even whispers coming out of these closed-door meetings suggesting that Musk is actually in favor of a shutdown. On top of that, DOGE is apparently looking into using AI chatbots like the GSA's GSAI and special software to make those workforce reductions even easier. You could argue that these technologies are being seen as a way to replace actual human workers in the long run.
We also had a listener mention Bernie Sanders and his fight against oligarchy, probably inspired by the Dave and Molly podcast. Does that tie into what we're seeing here with Musk and the government?
While Bernie Sanders isn't specifically quoted in the transcripts we looked at, the themes are definitely there. We're talking about immense wealth and power concentrated in the hands of someone like Musk. We're seeing a close relationship between wealthy individuals and government policy with the whole Trump-Musk dynamic. And then there's the potential impact of these government efficiency measures on essential public services. It all definitely resonates with the concerns people have about oligarchy. It's a matter of connecting the dots and seeing the bigger picture, even if it's not explicitly spelled out in every single source.
Right. So let's move on to this Nazi salute controversy that everyone's been talking about.
This refers to something that came up on the Joe Rogan podcast. Elon Musk made a certain gesture, and people were quick to interpret it as a Nazi salute.
And what was his explanation for it?
Musk claims it wasn't meant to be anything negative. He says it's just a gesture he makes frequently at UFC weigh-in events.
And there was some talk about how the media portrayed this.
Right. Musk accused CNN of deliberately using photos of him making this gesture at UFC events in a negative context. He basically said they were trying to link him to Nazi imagery and called it deliberate propaganda.
It's interesting because Musk used to have this image as this innovative, almost save the earth kind of guy. And now he's a vocal Trump supporter. What do you think might have led to this pretty dramatic shift?
Well, it's complicated. There are probably a lot of factors at play, but a lot of sources point to the COVID-19 pandemic and the government-mandated shutdowns of Tesla's factories back in 2020 as a major turning point. After that, he started tweeting things like Free America and criticizing lockdowns. That's when things really started to change.
And what about his personal life? Could that have played a role?
Some people have speculated that events like his split from Grimes and his child coming out as transgender and then cutting ties with him could have also contributed to this shift. One of the sources we looked at even mentioned the unmet core needs theory, the idea that when basic human needs for security, significance, and connection aren't met, it can lead to major changes in behavior, maybe even embracing extreme ideologies as a way to fulfill those needs.
And of course, buying Twitter, or X as it's called now, gave him this huge platform to promote his new political views.
Oh, absolutely. He's been using it nonstop to push conservative narratives, and he's become a major financial backer of Trump, even making a massive campaign donation. It's all pretty clear evidence of his shift in political alignment.
All right, let's move on to Social Security. Musk called it a Ponzi scheme on Joe Rogan's podcast. Is that a fair assessment?
Not really. It's true that the money current workers pay into Social Security is used to pay benefits to current retirees, but that's how a pay-as-you-go system works. It's not a Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme is a scam where early investors get paid with money from later investors, with no real underlying value being created, and those always collapse. Social Security, on the other hand, is backed by the taxing power and credit of the entire U.S. government.
So even though it relies on ongoing contributions, it's not a scam like a Ponzi scheme.
Exactly. It's designed to be self-sustaining. But it does face some challenges in the future because of demographics. There are going to be fewer workers paying in and more retirees collecting benefits. Projections suggest that the Social Security Trust Fund might run into a shortfall sometime in the mid-2030s if nothing changes. But it's crucial to understand this is a projected shortfall, not a total collapse, and there are policy adjustments that could address this issue.
And there was also that concerning report about people from Musk's DOGE getting access to sensitive Social Security data.
Yeah, that's a serious concern. A longtime Social Security Administration employee filed an affidavit expressing deep worries about DOGE personnel being given access to highly sensitive data like birth dates and Social Security numbers. The problem is these DOGE people reportedly lack the training and understanding of the complex Social Security systems. The fear is they could accidentally leak this data, putting millions of Americans at risk of identity theft. There were also specific concerns raised about DOGE personnel having access to critical data systems that could allow them to change or even stop benefit payments.
And what about Musk's confusing comments about Social Security and 8-year-olds?
Those comments were pretty incoherent and showed a lack of understanding about how Social Security actually works. He implied that children don't receive any benefits, which is simply not true. Children do receive survivor benefits if a parent passes away. This affidavit from the SSA employee really highlights the stark contrast between the well-established security and reliability of the Social Security system and the potential for disruption and risk if you put it under the control of an entity like DOGE, whose personnel may not have the right expertise. Also, the stability of the Social Security trust funds is worth noting, especially compared to the volatility of things like cryptocurrency, which is another area Musk is heavily involved in.
Okay, let's wrap up by talking about improper payments
Yeah.
and the whole push for government efficiency. I know there was a congressional hearing about this.
Right. Congress held a big hearing to address the issue of improper payments and fraud within the federal government. And this is something both parties are concerned about because we're talking about billions of taxpayer dollars being wasted every year. It's important to clarify, though, that improper payments can include things like paperwork errors, not just outright fraud.
So how do we fix this? What are the best strategies?
Well, everyone agrees that we need to reduce waste, fraud, and abuse. But there are different opinions on how to do that. One controversial move has been the firing of numerous inspectors general who are supposed to keep an eye on things and hold people accountable. Some people worry that this is weakening government oversight and making things less transparent. And even though Congress has passed laws to try and stop these improper payments, the Government Accountability Office, GAO, keeps reporting that billions are still being lost every year.
So are Musk's computer experts doing a better job at catching these problems?
That's the debate. Technology like AI can definitely help identify and prevent fraud, but it only works if the data it's using is accurate and reliable. Some people worry that focusing too much on technology will mean neglecting things like internal controls, employee training, and strong verification processes within government agencies. People who testified at the congressional hearing stressed that preventing these improper payments from happening in the first place is much better than trying to recover the money after it's gone. They also pointed out that government agencies often aren't even using the tools and systems they already have to prevent improper payments.
So this is a complex problem with no easy solutions.
Exactly. The Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, PRAC, has highlighted the importance of different government agencies working together and sharing data to prevent fraud. They learned a lot from trying to stop fraud related to pandemic relief funds. The bottom line is technology can help, but we also need strong oversight, robust internal controls, good data management, and clear accountability for the people in charge. That's how we'll really start to tackle this problem of improper payments and fraud.
Well, this has been a wild ride. We've covered so much ground today, connecting all these seemingly unrelated things that you were curious about from the Dave and Molly podcast. We talked about Elon Musk's controversial influence across technology, politics, and now the government, the growing pushback against Tesla, and the broader implications for government efficiency and public trust. It's clear that you now have a much better understanding of these complex issues.
Definitely. And it really highlights this fascinating intersection of technology, politics, and economics. And at the center of it all is this highly influential and often controversial figure.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on. Given everything we've discussed, Musk's evolving role in politics, Tesla's ups and downs in the market, and the big changes happening in government oversight, what do you think will have the biggest impact in the long run? Is it Musk's continued involvement in politics? Is it how Tesla performs in the market? Or is it the fundamental shifts happening within government agencies? It's worth thinking about all the different angles we've explored today. And if you want to dive deeper into any of this stuff, you could track Tesla's stock, follow developments in government efficiency initiatives, or even research the history and effectiveness of government oversight bodies. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.